This legendary commander tier list is going to review the very best commanders for open field fighting, rallying, garrisoning, even playing in Canyon. So stick around in this video for a detailed ranking of every commander across the most important parts of the game. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming and today's video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms, and my goal for this video is to tell you how good different commanders are right now in the meta for doing all of the most important things. And we're going to evaluate across the following categories. That's city defense, open field, rallying cities, rallying objectives, defending objectives, and also in Canyon. My goal for this list is to tell you how good a commander is right now. This is different, by the way, from whether or not they're a great investment. For example, a commander that's pretty dang solid in the open field is Ramses. In fact, he's pretty decent for rallying cities and a number of other things, but he's not a great investment right now because there are many other stronger commanders that you might prefer to pick first. And so those sorts of choices are decided in my investment video. I'll have a link to that at the end of this one. My goal here again is to tell you how strong commanders are right now. Another great example of that would be Leonidas. I use Guan and Leonidas in the open field, and I have for a very long time. Would I recommend him right now as a great investment? Maybe not. But is he still very strong? Yes, and I will explain where. So if you have him, you would use him. But would you invest in him? Not right now. Probably not anyways. For those of you newer to this format, this is something I put out on a regular basis. So consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'm now up to over 1,800 videos dedicated to making you a better player in Rise of Kingdoms. There are going to be timestamps in the description. I would encourage you to use them to jump to whichever portion of the video you're most interested in, and I will briefly put up on the screen the rating system. S+ is the very best. There's only one of those per category. Otherwise, the highest ranking is S, and then we've got A, B, C, and really we're just looking at the highest rankings here. This, by the way, also ladders into my epic tier list, and I'll have a card up in the top for that one. I'll remind you of that at the end of the video if you want to check that out. My goal with this list is to truly differentiate between the best of the best, what's next cut, and then what's really a tier below it. So just because a commander that you have isn't ranked highly across everything doesn't mean they're necessarily a bad commander. My goal, however, is to rank relative to the other options that are out there. So let's kick things off with city defense. And I just want to say that this is really a category that, in my opinion, has not changed. I think Theo and YSS are probably your best bet, and you could potentially switch to other things depending on how many troops of each type you have in your city or what rally they're using. But for the most part, you should probably just use a peace shield. Most people should not plan to defend their city against a rally, especially if you're not teching up and the person who's rallying you is teching up. So the best garrison commanders that you've got for city defense are Theo, YSS, Zeno, and Flavius, and Jan are also very strong. I have them at S-. Jadwiga and Wuzetian are all very strong, but you really shouldn't aspire to be taking rallies on your city. The category that most of you are probably here for is open field. That's where most of us spend the majority of our time. So let's talk about that. And I still think your very best commander in the open field is not quite Nevsky, although he is very good. I think it's probably Skippy for open field specifically. Skippy does too many amazing things. AoE damage, AoE health reduction, he has march speed, he does AoE shielding, he does instant proc damage over time. Skippy is simply too good to discredit for open field. He is the jam. Now that said, I did bump up some other commanders and I added some commanders to this list. For example, I've added Joan Prime, clocking in at an S. Already we see a bunch of the top spenders running around with her and using her specifically in Ark of Osiris League. She is extremely powerful. But other really powerful commanders include Nevsky, Boudica Prime, Guan Yu, XY, Nebu. I bumped up, by the way, my estimation of Henry. I had him slightly lower, and I realize now that he is just really powerful in the open field. He is kind of just a stat stick, but it is a lot of power that he's bringing. Really high active skill, good mobility, good damage mitigation. So I did bump him up. I also bumped up Artemisia from an S- to a full S. And that is because Artemisia now pairs really well with Boudica. And in fact, for the same reason that I bumped up Artemisia, I've also bumped up Isong. I think Isong I rated lower because he didn't have like a great place to put him. I find everywhere I used Isong, even Nebu Isong, was getting really, really wrecked from just any amount of pressure onto the march. And now Boudica Isong is arguably one of the best Boudica pairings. And for most people, you just get Boudica, put Isong with her, and then you don't think about archers and that pairing for probably another year. Otherwise, my open field list remains almost entirely the same from the last time I put out this update. The little has changed with the addition of Joan, but she is a strong addition, and I needed to make some adjustments based on how good we found Boudica Prime to be. From here, we need to talk about the thing that everybody loves to do when you're supposed to be focused on an objective, and that is rallying cities that are off territory, right? Now, I say that only half-jokingly, because rallying cities is actually important, and I really think XY is still the king of this category. If you're hitting a really big city, XY Nevsky is the jam. Other rallies are also good. In fact, I bumped up Boudica. I had her at an S-. I think she deserves an S. Overall, actually seeing some really great results with Boudica hitting cities. And in order to sort of account for how other rallies are performing now, I did need to bump a few down. So I put Nebu down just a tick compared to your other options here. He's at an S-, still a good city rally. I feel like the Nebu rally these days for archers is more about counterattack damage. So if they're going to swarm your rally or you run the risk of that, then you bring in the Nebu for all of the counterattack damage that he's got, and that will really hurt if they swarm it. It's not as tanky as like an Attila Takeda, but it's as close as it gets. Like a Henry Nebu is very close to kind of like an Attila Takeda equivalent for archers. Now, other commanders I also bumped down that are like fine, but just not as good as other options that you have include Ramses and Chandragupta. Again, not that they're bad, like S- is fine, but they're not as good as other options that you have at your disposal. So I'd love to see more use for Chandragupta, but I personally do feel like there are other better options. And I did also bump down Honda Tadakatsu. I feel like, I don't know why I gave him an S-, but I think A+ is a much safer grade. And although Mehmet is still shockingly relevant in the open field, I think if you're rallying a city, it's unfair to give him an S grade. I had to bring him down to S-. He's still solid, but I think compared to other options, he's not quite as good as what you could do. Also, Bertrand has really had a sort of fading role, and Bertrand is a really tragic tale. I'm very glad I didn't invest in this commander, which is a bummer for the people who did. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but like, it feels like he doesn't do enough tankiness and he doesn't do enough damage. And he's somewhere in the middle such that you'd rather have a higher damage rally or you'd rather have a much tankier rally. So I feel like Bertrand right now has got kind of a weird role for hitting cities specifically. This also is going to be true for rallying objectives. I did also unfortunately bump down Charlemagne. I really don't think you should put a sculpture into him, but comedically, somebody did hit my city with a Charlemagne, not a rally. They just directly attacked it. I made a YouTube short about that. I'll have a card up in the top, and I'll remind you of that at the end. It was very funny. And by the way, that was an expertise Charlemagne. One last commander I do need to talk about is Joan Prime, and I think she's actually going to be solid for hitting cities. I'm giving her an S. That might be an overestimation of how good she really is. Maybe this should be an S-. So I'm being a little bit bullish for how good I think she'll be for hitting cities, but I do think she is a strong rally when paired with Nevsky. Would I use her over XY Nevsky? No, I don't think we're there. Now this brings us to rallying objectives, and I also gave Joan of Arc an S. I am already seeing a lot of Joan with Nevsky rallies in Arc of Osiris League. I suspect she is also extremely good for rallying, and this may be overvaluing how good she is here for rallying. She might be more like an S-, so I don't want to get ahead of myself, but when paired with Nevsky, it does seem to be doing pretty well. But the rally meta right now is all about the right combo against specific garrisons. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. We need to talk about the archers. And I give Henry the S+. Henry is actually, I think, the best rally commander right now. And the reason I say he's the best rally commander right now is that you compare him with Gilgamesh to shut down Zeno. You compare him with Boudica, and it works fine, even against most cavalry. And now you have the new Jan Garrison, and that, by the way, really counters the archers. The archers do struggle with the Jan Garrison. However, I think one of the highest damage rallies that you can run right now is an XY Nevsky. That is still ranked very nicely. But XY Nevsky is countered by Zeno Flavius. And Zeno Flavius is countered by Henry with Gilga. So I don't know which one in this rock, paper, scissors you want to give the S+ to. It's all really close, generally speaking. But we need to talk about the commanders I bumped down. And some of them were just higher than they should have been. And some of them are now lower in my estimation based on the meta. I did bump down Pakal and Harold, which, you know, feel bad for them, but they're pretty hard countered by the new Jan Garrison. Also, Pakal and Harold's just too low of a DPS rally. I'm not supportive of really running this rally right now. You would rather kill your infantry using them in a garrison, 100%. Also, Bertrand, I talked about him earlier, man. I bumped him down to an S-. I just think his role isn't clear enough right now as to why you'd use him over some other commanders, besides the fact that you just have him already. I also bumped down Attila, which might sound a little weird, because Attila Nevsky is popular, but I don't think that's actually a great rally. I think it is an option that you could use if you think you're going to get swarmed, and you could try to do a bunch of damage by running that Attila Nevsky combo. The only reason you should be rallying with an Attila Nevsky is if you're going to be swarming the garrison anyways, and if you're going to be swarming the garrison anyways, then you'd probably rather have the extra damage of like a Bert Nevsky or even just like an XY Nevsky and do a better job filling the rally. Like, I don't know. I couldn't rank the Attila combo as highly as I was ranking other things. I feel like maybe I'm underplaying the value of this rally, but I wanted to differentiate it, and I'm giving it a tier lower. Now, people do use this in Ark, and they use this with great success. And I think Ark of Osiris is a little bit of a different situation, because you can't have a bunch of cities ported next to the thing that's being rallied. And in that instance, I feel like this rally actually does a little bit better. So that's the context in which I think this rally can actually do better than you might think. That is in Ark of Osiris. From here, we need to talk about garrisoning, and I made a dedicated video all about the best garrisons in the game. I'll have a card up in the top, so you can go check that out, and I'll remind you of that at the end of the video. But the garrison captain we need to talk about is, of course, Jan Ziska. I rank him at an S. He's really good against archers. He's strangely effective against Pakal Harold, so infantry hard countered by your cavalry. But this is going to be weak to a high damage rally like XY Nevsky or other high damage cavalry rallies. So I think overall the garrison meta actually has not changed much. I will say that I found Amanitore and Artemisia to be surprisingly relevant these days and surprisingly effective in the garrison, but still a cut below the other garrison options that you have. Some of those best options, by the way, include Zeno with Flavius and Zeno with YSS if you've run out of all infantry to stuff into a garrison. I also really like Jadwiga with YSS, still a very solid garrison. So the garrisons of the past are actually still really good. And I did, weirdly enough, bump up Nevsky a little bit in my rankings for using him to defend objectives. I don't think he's as good or as premium as your garrison captains, but I actually am giving Nevsky an A+ in the garrison. And like, honestly, might deserve an S-, but I'm bumping Nevsky up, man. We ran some tests, and it was weirdly effective in Ark of Osiris. I think it's very, very weak to getting swarmed. And there's weird stuff with how territory works when you're defending flags and with this commander. Without getting into all the nuance, I think he's solid and borderline might be an S-, but very vulnerable to swarming. And he's only viable in the garrison, I think, with Jan, okay? Jan is the primary and Nevsky is the secondary. This brings me, by the way, to the Canyon rankings. And this is the category and the game mode that people, I say jokingly, like, love to hate, because people play this game mode obsessively, myself included, but then also at times I find it very frustrating. because like you don't always know why you're winning or losing. And without getting into the details, there's a reason that I think it's important to include Canyon rankings here. I want you to win more in Canyon, okay? So with that said, I think there are very few commanders that get bumped up with the addition of Joan. And a lot of commanders get bumped down. Now, I think Joan herself clocks in at an S. She is amazing. I am using her in Canyon. I put her in the front line because she boosts normal attack damage in a lot of places. And so I want to be taking damage directly from the enemy so I can do counterattack to all of them. So I have her actually in the front. You could use her in an off lane, I suppose, but I prefer to have her more in like a big group because she's doing some nice AoE. So I include her in my sort of 4-stack or 3-stack when I'm hitting something and I want to get a lot of AoE to hit a lot of stuff. I also bumped up Richard the First, by the way. Dude, he is a Canyon machine. Like, I don't know. He is an S. He's solidly one of the best Canyon commanders right now. I mean, you run Richard and Constantine and you put that in an off lane, there is an answer, and that is to run archers against it, and that's Boudica, probably with Esong. But, like, it's still really good and basically makes it so that if you know what you're doing, you can win on offense almost all the time, which for me is pretty satisfying. So, Richard is up to an S, but a bunch of commanders get bumped down, unfortunately. Because of how strong Boudica is, especially with Esong, I needed to bump Nebu down to an S-, okay? Nebu gets bumped down because he's just not as good as the other archer combo, in my opinion. And you could even debate whether or not you need archers at all. Some people are running now 2 cav marches in the back and no archers at all. And I've seen it work. So I'm not saying everybody should do that. I'm saying it can work. But Boudica with Esong is really strong. Also, Pakal and Herald and other Herald shenanigans used to work in the off lane, and it's fine. I just don't think it's as good as it used to be. So sad for Herald. I bumped him down. Also, any shenanigans with Pakal. I mean, these two commanders, you can do some stuff with Pakal. I've seen it. It's weird, but it works. But Herald for sure, a tick below from where he was before. I think Amanatori used to be workable with Artemisia. Cavalry in the off lane is too strong now. It's way too prevalent. So I don't think that Amani and Art is a great combo to run. I think Artemisia retains her relevance only because she actually works pretty well with Boudica. So we're going to leave her at her current rating. Ramses I bumped down ever so slightly. And CJ, I bumped him down to A+, man. CJ has to be one of my least favorite commanders in Canyon. It just isn't doing any of the things that you really need. No debuffs, no meaningful AoE damage. It's really, on my restart, man, I'm telling you, I've used it extensively, and every time I'm like, how can I get rid of this from my lineup? It's just not good there. He does have one role where I would use him right away if I had him expertise, and that's open field, okay? That's a different matter entirely. But his role is just so narrow, and we did actually rally with him in this KVK, and it was bad. So I think I bumped down maybe his rating for rallying as well. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I already had it really low, but you do not want to use this dude for rallying. Now, I polled all of you to see which commander was the very best in Rise of Kingdoms between Nevsky and Skippy and Boudica and Joan Prime, because I wanted to have a sense of what the community thinks is the single best commander in the game. And I gave you those 4 options. And so before I put on the screen the overall rankings, let's get a look at how you ranked the commanders. A measly 6% of people picked Boudica Prime. Let me tell you, I think she's better than you think, but I don't think Boudica Prime is number 1. I do agree with you. So the 6% of you that chose this, I understand why you did. She's actually really good, but she's not the best in my opinion. 9% of you chose Joan of Arc, and I was actually a little bit surprised more people didn't choose her. But it's almost 1 in 10. Okay, 9 out of 100 chose Joan of Arc. She is really good. I think people underestimate the value of the buffs she's giving. But she's not number 1. The choice that people picked 30% of the time was Skippy Prime. And I agree with you for the open field. The dude is the best commander you got. He's usable in the Garrison, which is weird that you can use him in a Garrison with Flavius, and it works. And as long as they don't swarm, you're really going to get away with it. But I don't think, overall, he's the number 1. I agree with the 55% of people who have chosen Nevsky as the strongest commander overall in Rise of Kingdoms. So although I would say Skippy is a slightly better open field commander, it's really only slightly. You've got Nevsky, so good for open field, for rallying cities, for rallying objectives, for defending objectives. He's okay with Jan Žižka, and also in Canyon. I think he is the most versatile commander we've got in Rise of Kingdoms, and overall his power level is just really, really high. This means I have dethroned Skippy Prime as the best commander overall. And again, although Skippy Prime, I think he's the better open field commander, I think overall we have to give the crown here to Nevsky. But there are 3 other really high value commanders I did rank down. I ranked down Pakal and Herald overall because of their rally relevance really diminishing. So sorry for Pakal and Herald. I mean, I have them myself. I wish they were more valuable. For cheeseburgering, you can't do any better. When you pop out of your city and wreck somebody and pop back in, like, you cannot do better than this combo. But that is not something you invest in. It's something you do for incremental value. And then Amanatori, I had to bump down as well. Amanatori was previously an S, and although she is still a solid garrison, I feel like people are trying to get rid of her for using her in the open field in favor of options that have march speed. And Boudica Prime gave a strong incentive to pull Artemisia to pair with her. So I think a lot of people are abandoning the Amani Art combo in favor of other things. Those 2 archer marches you might run, for example, would be Boudica Prime with Artemisia and then Nebu with Isong. The time you really do want to pull Amanatori back into the lineup probably is if you're going to run 3 archer marches. I feel like that's when people are starting to bring her back in. So at that point, you're using like Boudica with Isong, Nebu with Tommy, and Amani and Artemisia. But this video is not about archer pairings. You get the idea. I bumped her down ever so slightly. S- is still good. It's just not as good as some of the other things that are in the S quality. There is one commander I considered bumping up, but didn't, and that is William. I think he could be deserving of an S, but he isn't very versatile. He's just really good at what he does. He's really good in the open field. He has no rally capability, no garrison capability, and he's really good in Canyon. That's really all he's good at, though. So that's the only thing holding him back from maybe where he should be, and maybe he should be an S, a tier above here. But otherwise, your S tier quality commanders, the best ones in the game, include Nevsky, Skippy, Boudica Prime, Joan Prime, Guan Yu, XY, Nebu, Gilgamesh, who is less exciting in the open field, but for rallying is so important against the Xeno, we cannot dethrone him in the S category. He has to stay. Henry, Alexander the Great, Artemisia, and Isong. Your S tier commanders. Now, just because a commander is good right now doesn't mean they will be forever, which is why I put together an investment tier list. That video and other ones that I referenced are going to be right on screen, in the end screen, and in the little info button right up in the top.